By July 12th, when Joseph and Michael Dunn and Jerry Holohan jumped into Matawan Creek, the panic over the shark attacks had died down. The boys must have heard about the attacks, listening to the grisly stories with pounding hearts and wide-eyed fascination. But why would they worry? Maybe there was a bloodthirsty shark somewhere out in the ocean, but in Matawan Creek, 15 miles inland, seemed as safe as a bathtub. In fact, the creek was connected to the Atlantic Ocean, its waters rising and falling with the ocean tides. Area fishermen routinely traveled to the creek from the Atlantic. They cut through Raritan Bay and then drove their boats directly into the creek. If a boat could make that journey, why couldn't a large shark? One of the few people who clearly understood this was a retired sea captain named Thomas Cottrell. He had been strolling along the creek earlier that day in the town of Matawan, about 1.5 miles from Cliffwood, gazing out on the water. The old fisherman's eyes locked on a chilling sight, a large fin slicing through the mud-brown waters. He stared dumbstruck, sure his vision was playing tricks on him. But the creature came closer, the sun lighting it up so that Cottrell would have no doubts about what he was looking at. A huge shark. The captain raced to Main Street and into the crowded barber shop. "There's a shark in the creek!" he boomed. Cottrell expected the men to jump to their feet and follow him to the creek. But nobody budged, and Captain Cottrell couldn't help noticing how some of the men raised their eyebrows and smirked. The captain understood. These people thought he was just a confused old man. Nobody was going to believe his story, but the captain had spent years fishing the world's oceans. He had come face to face with some of the fiercest beasts in the sea. He was certain that there was a shark in Matawan Creek, in the same waters where local kids loved to swim. The captain rushed back to the dock and fired up his motorboat, steering it up the winding creek and shouting out warnings. Joseph, Michael, and Jerry were not in the water yet when the captain was spreading the alarm. And Cottrell just missed another group of swimmers, 12-year-old Lester Stillwell and his pals, who had come to the creek to cool off. Cottrell's boat was out of sight by the time Lester and his friends arrived at the dock, peeled off their sweaty clothes, and jumped into the water. What happened next would haunt Lester's friends for the rest of their lives. Lester was floating on his back when, seemingly out of nowhere, the shark exploded out of the water, its enormous jaws wide open. His friends stared in shock at the beast, snatched Lester by his arm, and pulled him underwater. The boy surfaced just one more time, screaming, but there was nothing for his terrified friends to do but run and get help. They sprinted into town, half naked, soaking wet and sobbing. "A shark's got Lester! A shark's got Lester!" they cried. The townspeople who saw the hysterical boys knew that something horrific had happened to young Lester Stillwell. Soon, dozens of people were at the dock where the boys had been swimming, shouting for Lester. It couldn't really be a shark, could it? Was some other monstrous animal in the creek? Had the boy simply drowned? In the swirl of fear and confusion, one terrible fact could not be denied. Lester Stillwell was gone. Two young men at the dock, Stanley Fisher and George Burlow, was determined to at least find Lester's body. Stanley and George took a rowboat into the middle of the creek and used poles to probe the deep water. When that didn't work, they got into the creek and began to dive to the bottom. Over and over, the men held their breath and dove down, groping blindly in the dark for Lester's body. Up and down they went, up and down, as the crowd stood in silence. An hour passed, then two. Just when the search seemed hopeless, Fisher burst up through the water, gasping for breath, shouting that he had found Lester's body. But suddenly, there was a thundering splash. Fisher's arm flew up in the air. "He got me!" he cried. The shark had clamped its jaws onto Fisher's thigh and was trying to drag him underwater. The crowd stood in helpless horror as Fisher tried to fight off the shark. He pummeled the beast with his fists and tried to gouge it in the eye. He twisted and thrashed. Each time the shark dragged Fisher under the water, Fisher managed to battle his way back up, and then, miraculously, Fisher broke free from the shark's jaws. Gasping for breath, he managed to swim back to the dock, his face twisted in agony and exhaustion.